What should you do during a DWI traffic stop? Hi, I'm Jeff Hampton with the Hampton Law Firm. Today I'm going to break down what should you do from the beginning to the end, A to Z. What should you do if you get pulled over for a DWI traffic stop? By the way, if you wait around to the end of this video, I'll also give you a free ebook. If you happened to have already been arrested for a DWI, I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to your DWI defense in Texas. Okay, maybe you had a few drinks with friends. Maybe you're out having a good time with folks and maybe just a couple of drinks and you decide you're driving home and maybe you failed to use your turn signal, right? Just something very small, not even a big deal. But a police officer was watching you pull out of the bar or the restaurant, targeting to look and see if maybe you might commit a traffic violation to pull you over. Well, now you see the lights behind you, you realize you're being pulled over. You don't think you're drunk, but at the end of the day, you know you've also had something to drink. What do you do? How should you act? What's the best way to deal with the situation? So what I want to talk to you about today is there's certain ways that you can respond to a police officer, certain things to just be generally aware of if you ever find yourself in this situation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the DWI traffic stop. Now you have an officer pulling you over, okay? What to expect. Now, if an officer is pulling you over for suspicion of driving while intoxicated, they are likely looking for traffic violations to pull you over. Then they will be looking at everything else you say and everything else you do as a possible sign of intoxication. For example, this happens sometimes, and I watch a lot of DWI videos. What if an officer walks up to you and there you are in your car and they start being very rude to you? What if they're not being very friendly? Maybe they're being very direct. They're saying, hey, I smell alcohol in your breath. I know you're drunk. Tell me what's going on. And maybe you feel a little intimidated by what's happening in that moment. Now listen, if you respond with, I'm just going to tell you this straight up because I know how the officers are going to look at this. If you respond with any attitude at all or any frustration, you know what the officer's going to write down? He's going to write down in his police report that your frustration or that your attitude was an actual sign of intoxication. Remember, an officer who's already decided, particularly if he's looking at you as a possible DWI arrest, he's trying to gather any information that he can for probable cause to arrest you. So be aware of that. So as a result, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Generally, now every case is unique, every situation is unique, but it's always good to be able to make sure and just be very respectful to the police officer, have your driver's license, have your proof of insurance ready to just go ahead and hand it over to them and say, yes, sir, no problem, officer, how can I help? And then let them do their initial portion of their investigation. Now, I want to remind you, it is not a crime to drink and drive. It is only a crime to be intoxicated. So, however, if the officer can have you admit that you have been drinking or have you get into some type of discussion about how much you had to drink over a certain period of time and to try to articulate something that makes it look like you've had maybe too much to drink, I want you to realize they will overwhelmingly look for a reason to arrest you for a DWI. Most officers are trained when they have somebody admit that they've been drinking, get ready. There's going to be a long investigation now. You're going to end up having to do field sobriety tests. There's probably going to be a potential arrest, breath and blood testing. All these things are coming as a result of that. So what I mean by that is, here's my general thoughts on this. Be careful what you say to the officer. Only provide information that is absolutely necessary. One of the worst things I see people do is they just start running off at the mouth. They just keep talking and talking and talking, and everything they say, the officer's going to be like, well, I didn't ask you that question, did I? Well, you're actually talking about things that are not important to what I'm talking about. Well, how do they see that? You must be drunk, right? That's how they make those conclusions. So only answer the questions that are specifically being brought up, and you don't have to give them everything, okay? I want you to realize that. Now, you can be compliant, you can be nice without explaining everything in the world to the officer. So I know that's easy to do that when you start getting nervous. But everything you say can be crafted as a possible means to arrest you. Okay, that's step number one, is the traffic stop. Let's go to step number two. What about the encounter with the officer? You're now having this encounter. The officer asks you to do what? Get out of the car. Need you to step out of the car, and we're going to talk for a couple of minutes. I'm going to have you do a few things. Well, he is now watching everything you do. So I want you to understand, when you step out of that car, he's watching how you get out of the car. He's watching, do you have balance? How is your speech? How is your attitude? I'm going to give you some common examples, signs of intoxication that are actually a part of the form for DWI officers for them to check, like a checkbox for them to be able to mark that you're intoxicated. Some of the things they're looking for: strong odor of an alcoholic beverage, slurred speech, unsteady on your feet, bloodshot, watery eyes, confused responses. Now listen, I want to tell you this. If you have bloodshot, watery eyes because you're exhausted, we've had many people that we've represented for DWIs, they hadn't slept because they've worked long shifts. You need to tell the officer that. If you're going to tell somebody something, explain, let that officer know the reason why. There are many different signs that an officer will immediately assume is because of intoxication, and there can be another non-intoxication reason for that. That's good information to be able to share when an officer is assessing you, okay? Now, let's talk about field sobriety testing, because if the officer gets you out of the car, there's a very good possibility you're going to end up doing field sobriety testing on a DWI stop. So here's one of the things to know. First, people ask me this all the time: do I have to do them or do I not have to do them? You don't have to do them if you don't want to, right? I mean, you could tell the officer, I'm not doing field sobriety tests, but I do want you to understand, choosing not to do the field sobriety test means you will also be arrested. They're going to arrest you. The law has this portion in it where it says that they can take your refusal to give a field sobriety test as a basis for them to actually arrest you and establish probable cause for an arrest. Now, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about if you do perform them. This is the part I feel like field sobriety tests are very unfair to the person taking the test. You don't know the rules, you don't know what they're looking for, and so the officer really can just grade you very unfairly when you're doing field sobriety tests. So if you do perform them, be aware of these things. Now let me just say this: how many times does someone get pulled over for a DWI and they've got bad knees, they've got a foot problem, they've got some balance issues, maybe they've had surgery recently, maybe they've got, you just name it, maybe they've got some type of long-term medical issue that can explain why they might not look normal, quote unquote, to that officer. You need to tell the officer that information. You can say, officer, I have no problem performing this test, but I do want you to understand I've had knee surgery, my knees are a mess, or I've had really bad problems with my feet, I've got sciatica in my back, I've got whatever it is. You explain that to the officer. You understand 2 out of the 3 field sobriety tests are physical in nature. So if you have physical ailments, physical problems, that could be an explanation for the performance on that test that has nothing to do with alcohol. So you need to share that information. Now here's the other thing, and this is a hard one to talk about, but the National Highway and Traffic and Safety Administration says that if you're overweight, that can actually be a reason why you failed the test and has nothing to do with intoxication. Okay, and so it's okay to pretty much make that clear that no problem, I don't have very good balance anyway, I'm a little overweight, need to lose a little bit of weight. And this is one of those things that people don't talk about. And so you need to realize, explain everything that might make you feel uncomfortable. And I'm gonna give you an example. What people don't realize on the walk and turn test, the officer is going to ask you to stand with one foot right in front of the other, hands down by your side, and while he gives you the instructions. Now, what if you step out of that position while he's giving you those long instructions for 45 seconds to a minute? Well, if you step out of that position, that's going to be a mark against you. What if you start the test too early before he says go? That's a second mark against you. You have now failed one of those tests before you even started it. So my point is, I want you to understand, if an officer starts giving you instructions to things, make sure those instructions are crystal clear. It's not your responsibility to know what those instructions are. It's his responsibility to fully explain them and make sure you know what you're doing, so that way that officer both explains them and administers. He's supposed to give an example of how to do the test. Make sure and put it back on that officer to make sure and do his job on that. Now, by the way, how many of us are going to be nervous sitting on the side of the road with people driving by and you have to do field sobriety tests? It's also okay to tell the officer how nervous you are. I've actually had clients that were so nervous they were shaking. Their cars are just driving right by where they're at and they're freaking out. You need to make that clear to the officer, because once again, nervousness can be a reason why someone does not perform normal on field sobriety tests as well. Okay, now those are just a few things to be aware of. Now let's talk about the arrest. What if an officer now arrests you and he wants you to do breath or blood testing? Here's the question: to consent or not consent, right? What do? Do you consent to the breath or blood test? Do you not consent to the breath or blood test? If you consent, here's the negative. They will get the blood draw or the breath test quicker, and they can argue it's more reliable because it is closer in time to the time you were operating the vehicle. All right. So that's what they're looking for. They want you to consent to all of that. Now people say, well, what's the downside to consenting? Or what's the positive? Is there a positive to consenting? The only positive is if your driver's license is suspended, it'll only be suspended for 90 days instead of 180 days on a first-time DWI. That's really the only benefit you get. Okay, so I'm not telling you whether you should consent or not consent. I just want you to understand the ramifications of that. What if you do not consent? What if you say, no, I'm not doing this, I'm not intoxicated, no reason for me to give a breath or blood sample? Well, now they will have to get a warrant. I want you to understand it could take hours to get a warrant. And so under the law, there's something called extrapolation. So let's say that it takes them 2, 3, 4 hours to get a warrant for your blood draw, and now the blood draw is taken 3 or 4 hours after you were driving the car. Well, they have to extrapolate back in time to tie in what your blood alcohol level would have been at the time you were operating that vehicle. That might be a harder task on a case where now the blood draw was 4 hours later, because we absorb alcohol at 0.02 per hour. So think about it. 4 hours later, you could be as much as 0.08 higher. You could be as much as 0.08 lower. So if you end up having a blood alcohol level that gives that huge of a range, it could be possible where you now in a trial could have a toxicologist testify, well, I can't say for sure because the blood draw was done so long after the time he was operating the motor vehicle, he could have been under the legal limit, or technically that could happen. Remember, the state of Texas must prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there's doubt about a critical issue regarding blood alcohol level, that could provide you some leverage in how to resolve your case. Okay, so what's the penalty for this? What if you do go ahead and you refuse? Well, once again, the only real negative to refusing is that your driver's license suspension could be 90 days longer. It can end up being 180 days instead of 90 days. Okay, now finally, here's the question I get all the time. Well, does it matter what I do if I'm drunk or I'm not drunk? Like, what if I am drunk? What should I do? What if I'm not drunk? What should I do? Well, let me just say this. Let's say you are 100% for sure no intoxication. You've had nothing to drink. You've had no drugs whatsoever. Here's what you can always ask the officer to do. You can say, officer, I would like right now to take a portable breath test. Do you have a portable breath test device in your vehicle right now? Because here's the thing. You're on video. At that moment, the most reliable thing you could possibly do is take a test right there on the scene. Now here's the key though, portable breath tests have been ruled to be inadmissible in court. The reason why? They're not reliable enough to meet the 702 standards of scientific reliability in court. And so as a result of that, you have the opportunity though to be able to show, I'm willing to take your test right now. I've had nothing to drink. I've had nothing, no drugs, nothing's in my system. I want to take the test right now. And we've actually had some clients that when they took that portable breath test, it comes back with big zeros. It's on the video. The officer looks at it and says, maybe I'm just going to let this guy go. Okay. So if you know for sure you've had nothing to drink, ask for a portable breath test. Give the officer an out. Give them an opportunity to be able to use some objective measure to know you've had nothing to drink. Okay. So what if you had a few drinks though? That's the other question. What if and I'm not saying, look, if you're just completely drunk, that's a different situation. But what if you've just been out with some friends and you've had a few drinks? Be careful because the officer will label everything that you do as intoxication, literally everything. And I'm not kidding. I've seen it before where he'll ask, can I have a copy of let me see your driver's license. The client's nervous and he grabs it and he hands it to him. And he writes down, the way that he grabbed his driver's license appeared to me that it was not normal. And as a result of that, I believe that was because he was intoxicated. So be aware of the fact that everything you do, they're going to try to label that as a sign of intoxication. But remember, you can't change the police officer's opinion about you at all. But you can limit how much information you decide to provide to that police officer so that way it cannot be put into a police report to come across as some type of objective evidence against you. Okay, so I know I'm kind of giving you a little bit of different food for thought here, different things to consider, and it's really up to you and your situation that you're in, but I just want you to understand, I hope this was of some help to you. I promised you if you waited around to the end of this video, I'd give you a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Your DWI Defense in Texas. And by the way, if you or a loved one has been arrested for a DWI in the North Texas area, this phone number that you see above, give us a call. We'll give you a free consultation and a free case analysis. I want to thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel today. Look forward to our next topic and seeing you then.